I recently heard Patrick Lencioni say, trust is not just that you know someone's going to do something. That's called predictability. But trust is really built on vulnerability, the ability to tell the truth, to be transparent, to expose what's going on in your own life or what has been, or even what you're thinking in the moment. That's where trust comes from. And when you're trying to build a relationship as a leader, whether it's with your team or the people that you report to, maybe it's the board, maybe it's the other executives, if you're not willing to be transparent enough to tell the truth about who you are, what you're thinking, where you're going, what's coming next, and maybe even where you've been, the odds are you're counting on your predictability to build trust. And it won't do that. It can't. Welcome to Leading Leaders Podcast. 5-minute videos, 5 days a week. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast. And one of the things that really struck me in that conversation as I listened to Patrick Lencioni talk about that, and he talked about the dysfunctions of a team as part of another teaching, but within the whole teaching, this was one of the main things that he talked about, was the idea of trust and this relationship building aspect. And I see so many people who, they call it authenticity when they say something that might be offensive to you. And I think we really need to draw the line between authentic and offensive. There are a lot of people who use that as an excuse. Listen, if you're not going to pay enough attention to what my own sensibilities are, to what your audience or the team that you're speaking to or working with is offended by, whether it's racism or religion or politics or whatever else, if you don't care what offends them and you use the excuse of I'm just being authentic, I'm just being me, for a reason to be offensive, that's not authentic. That's just offensive. And it's a manipulation of meanings just to get your own way. It's not a good thing, and it's certainly not a good flavor for leadership. One of the challenges with being authentic is realizing that being authentic and being vulnerable, those are intrinsically tied to each other. Being authentic sometimes means you're going to expose some real things about you, some real life about you, that's just downright human. Yeah, human. It's human to err. It's human to make mistakes. It's human to hurt people unintentionally. It's human to do those things that make people go, huh? Why would you do that? But it's also human to say, I'm sorry, I screwed that up. I wish I'd made a better choice. In fact, help me understand how I could be better at that next time. That level of humanity, that level of vulnerability, that level of transparency, that's really what we're looking for in our leaders. It's what we're looking for in our team. I don't care if you're at mid-level management or all the way up in the C-suite, anywhere that other people are having to report to you, listen to your ideas, follow your instructions. They want to know that you're capable of recognizing that you screwed up and that you're willing to say, hold up, my bad. I said that wrong. I did that wrong. I had the wrong idea. Help me correct it. Give me some ideas that will give us another sense of direction on that. Help me see where I was wrong, because I really want to be right. And if I need to be corrected to be right, then correct me. Trust also is built on knowing that when you're that vulnerable, when you're that real, when you're that honest and you're that human, that other people are not going to take advantage of the opportunity just to humiliate you, just to get one up on you politically. That they're going to realize that this is a moment of vulnerability, and I'm going to counter that with my own humanity, my own vulnerability, my own weaknesses, my own fears, and I'm going to say, you know what? I could have done the same thing. Here's how we could do differently together. And a leader's got to be able to trust that the team beneath him is not just out to destroy him over his vulnerability and authenticity, but is willing to participate with him, to cooperate with him, with her, to be better. I don't use him and her, by the way, to be sexist. I use that as a universal pronoun. So whatever you're thinking about that, that's just my moment of vulnerability. It's not intentionally sexist one way or the other. It's just a way of simplifying the language. See, now I've added another 30 seconds of conversation to replace a pronoun. Is that vulnerability? Is that building trust? Is that being human? Is it covering a mistake? I think we got to take the time to do that. But when I say him, I'm not meaning him versus her. I simply mean them, people, pronouns. So it's a habit. I'll work on that. I promise I'll work on that. One of the vulnerabilities that I believe we need to make is to be able to go back as far in time as need be and ask the questions, when have I seen patterns, these unconscious biases, these storylines that run through our head, these things that stay with us for decades, and sometimes we don't realize how important they are or where they fit in our life. Maybe it was an incident when you were 5 or 6 years old that carried forward. I remember reading a book called Early Childhood Memories. Dr. Kevin Lehman, I believe it was. And he talked about a young girl who had everything going in her life. She was a head of this committee and a part of that committee and kids in soccer and kids in band and kids in track. And she was just going all the time. She had all kinds of volunteer stuff she did for the school and all kinds of volunteer stuff for the church. And she worked a job on top of that. And she had a husband and a very busy life. But she always felt like, I'm just not good enough. I just can't do everything that I should. And when she sat down with the therapist and started asking the questions, he let her talk for a while. And then he said, tell me the very first thing you remember in your life, the very first moment you remember in your life. Not something somebody else told you about, not something your parents have repeated over and over, but the first memory you have in your own head that is unique and identifiable by you. And she began to cry as she told him about how her dad was a traveling salesman when she was a kid. And one day he came home, was exhausted, went straight to bed in the middle of the morning and was taking a nap. And she decided, his car is dirty, I will wash it for him. And so about 3 or 4 years old, she went out there and washed his entire car. You can imagine what a 3-year-old hand car wash looks like on a new car. Well, she woke him up early from his nap. He's a little bit groggy, a little bit frustrated that his nap got interrupted. She brings him outside to see the car because she's so proud, so excited of all the effort she put into washing the car. Then he takes one look at the car and he turns around and goes back inside without a word. He gets fully dressed in his scrubby clothes and he goes back outside, not a word, and washes the entire car top to bottom. Now, without correcting her, without telling her, you really screwed this up, you did a horrible job, that looks like garbage, I can't believe you did that to my car, and without a word of saying, thank you for the effort. I'm so proud of you for trying to wash my car. What a gracious and considerate idea for a 3 or 4-year-old to actually go out there and wash someone else's car without being asked to. Nope, that's not what he did. What he did was redid her work without a word. Not a word of gratitude, not a word of condemnation, not a word. Now you may think 20 years later, 30 years later, 40 years later, who cares? It's just a car wash. It's just a kid thing, right? No, those early childhood memories really begin to set in us some concrete examples of what life is going to be like. And the vulnerability that she exposed herself with in that very young, formidable age to say, I'm going to go over the edge, I'm going to go over the limit, I'm going to do more than I've been asked to do. Out of the kindness of my own heart, that gift was squashed by someone who simply didn't recognize how important their 2 or 3 words could have been to say, thank you, you did a great job. I know there are people listening right now, watching right now, who are thinking to themselves, there was a moment in my life that somebody could have said, but they didn't. And even today, the way I lead, even today, the way I am as an employer, as a manager, or even as an employee, is a direct relationship to the story that's been playing in my head since then. Even today, you're making decisions, you're charging people with things that they're not guilty of, and by that I mean holding them accountable for things you haven't asked them to do, or holding against them something that they haven't done even though you didn't tell them to, because the work was imperfect. If you want to be a trusted leader, you're going to have to be vulnerable. You're going to have to be open and honest and say, I screwed that up. It was my perception. It was the way I was looking at it, and then I was wrong, and I'm sorry. let's go forward from here and do it like this. Here's what I recommend. Here's what I suggest. Here's what I would love to see. And I think as you do that, building that trust and that vulnerability, not just on predicted behavior, but on actual trust that's empowering to other people, I think you'll see a very powerful growth in your leadership and in the influence that you have in your life. Now, in a moment of my own vulnerability and transparency, I probably won't be able to do another podcast every day this week because I'm going to go step way out of my comfort zone and do what I had prayed I would never have to do, but I will be responsible for taking care of my mother, kind of like a home health nurse over the next week. Her health is challenging right now. It might be some early onset Alzheimer's or something like that. She's had a hard time recalling my name, and that's painful enough by itself. But to know that I've got to step in and do things that, as an EMT, I've drug people out of burning cars. I've cut their pant legs off or cut their shirts off or whatever to do what's necessary to provide medical attention for them. But to provide that level of attention for my mother it's just weird. It's uncomfortable. But over the next week, I'll be growing, probably in a lot of vulnerability, probably in a lot of stories that haven't been through my head in a long, long time, and in a lot of areas where it's going to make me go, ew. But at the same time, it's going to be honoring my mother because of all of the promises in the world. Honor your parents so that your life will be long on the earth. That's probably the most hinging promise, if this, then this, that's ever been made, other than if my people will humble themselves and pray. When you put those two together, if you want to make sure that your life is good on earth, honor your parents. That takes some vulnerability, and that takes sometimes stepping out of your comfort zone. And so that's what we'll be doing this week. So if you don't see my face here again for the rest of the week, don't be at all surprised. I'll be back next week or as soon as I return from my mission, so to speak. But I hope that you will take the idea of being vulnerable and transparent and real, take it to heart. Let it be something that allows you to have a relationship with people, because in the end, it's not the paycheck that's going to matter. Nope. It's not the number of followers on Twitter or Instagram that's going to matter. Nope. It's going to be the relationship with the people who know you the best, the ones who've had to work with you every day, the ones who've had to live in your own home. Those are going to be the people that are going to matter in the end. And trust is built on vulnerability, not just predictability. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast for Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day. Subscribe now for our extensive video library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom.